Thanks very much. So I'm Anthony Aycock. I'm at the Legislative Library over in the Legislative Office Building, which is the building behind the building where the legislative chambers are located. And I'm new there. I've been there only since November 1st. I took the place of Kathy Martin, whom many of you probably know. She was there for 27 years, I believe, and I've been there for 4 months, 5 months. Before coming to the Legislative Library, I was with the Department of Justice, North Carolina Department of Justice. I was at the Justice Academy, which you may be familiar with. That's located in Salemburg, so that's for law enforcement training. So all the law enforcement officers in North Carolina who have to do in-service every year, that's what we did. I went there as the director of the library, and then I moved into a support services manager position there. And I was there for about 8 years. Before that, I helped start the Charlotte School of Law, which is a dubious distinction since it's now out of business. And I worked for law firms in North Carolina before that. Before I got into librarianship, I was a McDonald's restaurant manager for 10 years, which is the same thing, except no French fries, no smelling like grease, no sleeping on the floors. People always, yes, I did go to Hamburger University, which is a real place. I have a diploma in my office from Hamburger University, restaurant management training. People always ask me two things about McDonald's. They ask me, is Big Mac sauce really Thousand Island dressing? No. They're similar, but not the same. And they always ask me, do McDonald's employees spit in my food or anything like that? I would say no, unless you make us mad by not turning off your windshield wipers in the drive-thru when it's raining, because that just slings water right in our faces. We don't like that. All right, so enough about me. So you're here to learn a little bit about, or to get some refresher or reinforcement on legal research. So if you're a librarian at all, working in any kind of public facility, you get legal questions. So we are all accidental law librarians. We all get legal questions, and you might not know, like I have been in law libraries for most of my career, but I have no training in law. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a paralegal. I was just a librarian. So I had to learn on the job. And what I'm about to tell you is stuff that I wish someone had told me when I was starting out. So, what are we going to talk about? A couple of things. And you may already know some of this, so if you do, then it'll be a good review for you. But when we talk about the law, what are we talking about? Legal publishing. So we'll go over that a little bit. Or what are all those books on law and order, which I love. How to copyright your name. That is how to answer legal questions, which can be very interesting at times. The cyber chase, I'll talk a little bit about some free or low-cost websites that'll help you. And then I'll spend some time talking about resources that we have over at the Legislative Library that you may not be familiar with. And then any questions, of course. So, if you're a fan of Law and Order like me, you've seen shots like this many times, and see all the books back here behind them, and all the books behind McCoy in his office. You may have wondered, what are all those books? Are those just props? They're real law books as far as I can tell. West, or Thomson Reuters, is the leading publisher and has been since the 1800s. West Publishing has been in business, publishing statutes and cases and secondary sources and all of that stuff, publishing United States law. So like down in the lower left corner, those are reporters that you can see right on the shelf behind him. The same thing. The telltale red band at the top and the black band at the bottom. So what are all those things? Well, when we talk about legal publishing, I think of it in terms of 4 big categories: statutes, cases, regulations, and secondary sources. Statutes are, that's what the General Assembly here in North Carolina, that's what the General Assembly does. We pass the statutes. So the legislature meets and passes laws. They come out first in what's called session laws, and there's just an example of a citation. House bills, Senate bills, passed into session laws, then they get codified into the statutes, and I'm sure you're familiar with the North Carolina General Statutes. Not every session law, though, is codified into the statutes, particularly local matters, like changing the boundaries of a town, or changing a town charter, or renaming Joe's Bar and Grill as something else, as naming it after a legislator or something. Those kinds of local acts don't get codified into the general statutes, but they are still statutes. They are still session laws. So if you're researching some kind of local matter, that can be a little trickier. When people don't agree on the meaning of statutes and they sue one another, those end up as cases. And of course, you all know about how courts work. There are trials for criminal matters and for civil matters. And whatever gets decided at trial, the losing side will often appeal to, here in North Carolina, the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and then above that is the North Carolina Supreme Court. And it's those decisions of the appellate courts, the justices write those opinions where they're ruling on the law, and those get published or reported is also the term. So there are two examples right there. 143 North Carolina 264, that's a North Carolina Supreme Court opinion. I don't know what case that is, I just made up those numbers, but that's how it would look. The F3D, that's at the federal level. That's a United States Court of Appeals case. So the same thing happens at the state levels or at the federal levels. And different states' court systems are structured differently. Here in North Carolina, we have two appellate courts. We have the Court of Appeals and then the North Carolina Supreme Court. Some states have only one appellate court. They don't have a separate Court of Appeals from the Supreme Court. And different states will name them differently. In New York, the trial court is actually called New York Supreme Court. That always confused me watching Law and Order episodes. I always wondered about that. So different states do it differently, but the concept is the same. Trials, the results of trials get appealed, and when those justices rule on those appeals, they're interpreting the law, and their opinions get published in the reporters, but not all of them. Some cases, as you can see, are unpublished, which means the court just issues them, but they don't get picked up by West and published in the reporters. And in terms of precedent, unpublished cases are not binding. That is, judges don't have to follow the rulings from previous unpublished cases. Published cases are the ones that are authoritative. Regulations. So let's say a statute creates the Internal Revenue Service, whenever that was done, back in the 1930s or whenever, 20s. So hereby we create the Internal Revenue Service, and that is an agency that is going to assess taxes on us. Well, that agency then creates regulations, which are rules on how they're going to do it. And that's what regulations are. And they get collected in the federal level, the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. But individual states do the same thing. So here in North Carolina, the Department of Revenue collects your taxes, and they have rules on how they're going to do that. Those get published in the North Carolina Administrative Code. Regulations are like statutes, they're rules, except they're not created by the legislatures, they're created by the individual agencies. So at the federal level, the FBI, the IRS, the Department of Transportation, all of those agencies create their rules for how they're going to do things. And those rules, as I said, are like statutes in that they have the force of law. They're just not created by the legislature. They're created by the individual agencies. But agencies are authorized to do that by the statutes that create the agencies. And then secondary sources are just publications that help you interpret or understand or locate the law. So if you're trying to locate statutes, cases, and regulations, secondary sources can help you. So these are just books or things about the law. So treatises are big multi-volume, in-depth explorations of particular areas of law. There are lots of books that contain forms, and forms are what people are often looking for. People are often looking for, I need a form to change my name, or I need a form to sue my ex-wife who won't let me see my kids, and stuff like that. People ask for forms. Attorneys ask for forms. And they're things like a particular kind of contract, or a particular type of pleading, or a particular type of document that needs to be filed in court. Because attorneys don't like to make things up from scratch, because it saves time to use a template. So think of those as templates. And then, of course, journals and newsletters that all have to do with the law. So that's what we mean by legal publishing. So these are the materials that people are looking for. These are just a few North Carolina specific secondary sources. Some of which you have, we have them in our collection. You have this one in your collection too, I believe, that you might be familiar with. I'm just clicking on this link, and this brings up the catalog record that just shows that this exists. So this is very good for historical legislative material. So back to colonial times, legislators and sessions back to colonial times, historical coverage of the North Carolina Constitution. We frequently get requests for biographical information of North Carolina legislators. If you do as well, these are a couple of good resources that you also have according to the catalog here at the government library. The summaries of substantive ratified legislation, we have these on our website going back to, as you see, 1989. So these are, as it says, summaries. So they're a good quick way to get an idea of what particular legislation for a particular year accomplished. So if someone asks you, I think there was a law back in 1994 that did so-and-so, this would be a good place to get a high-level view of, you could read the summaries or direct the patron to look at the summaries and help them locate the particular law that they're looking for.
What if they didn't know the year? Maybe they had a range, like I think it was in the 90s.
You can direct them here, or we have legislation here on our website with keyword searchable features. You can search the bill text. And I think on here we go back to at least that far, but probably farther. Let's see, let's look at the session laws. Okay, so we go back to 1959 session electronically here on our website. And as you can see, there are some keyword search, some full text searches. Now this is not, the keyword searching here is not as good as some of the best databases that we work with, but it's good enough. It's pretty good. And then this, North Carolina Legal Research, is a book that is excellent. This is published by Carolina Academic Press. And it's a couple of years, it's 3 or 4 years old, but it's still a very good overview of doing legal research in North Carolina. So this book would discuss, like what I've said so far, statute publication in North Carolina, how that works, North Carolina cases, and North Carolina specific secondary sources. So that's a good one. All right, so that's what people are looking for. That is what is published. And so when they come to you, when people come to you asking questions, so attorneys, if you get attorneys who are talking to you, they for the most part know, of course they understand the law, so they're able to intelligently phrase their questions and specifically phrase them so that you'll know what they're looking for. The general public does not necessarily understand how the law works, and so they're liable to ask you questions like the question I got. In a law library where I worked in the past, someone wanted to know how I can copyright my name, because I don't want to get tax bills in the mail that are addressed to me. I don't want anyone using my name. I want to copyright my name so that no one else can use it. That's pretty clever, right? I bet you never thought of that. I bet you never thought of that. Well, as you can see down at the bottom, sorry, you can't do that. But how should you approach, how should you deal with people? I've observed in my career that librarians get very nervous when they're asked legal questions because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of accidentally practicing law and getting sued. I'm not aware ever of any instance where a librarian, there is such a thing as the unauthorized practice of law, and that UPL, that's a link to a discussion of it. But I'm not aware of any instance of a librarian being liable for the unauthorized practice of law just for helping someone do some legal research. So my advice to you is don't worry about that. But I know that by the time public patrons who are operating pro se just means for oneself, that's a Latin phrase. That's people who are representing themselves without an attorney. That's people who are doing their own legal work. So they're up against long odds anyway because you can't fight City Hall. So they're trying to represent themselves, and they're facing attorneys on the other side who know what they're doing. They don't have any money. They don't have any resources. So they call the courthouse, and the courthouse tells them, oh, we can't help you. So they call the governor's office, and the governor's office says, oh, we can't help you. They call the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice says, oh, we can't help you. And finally, they get to you because somebody told them, why don't you call the state library, and maybe they'll help you. And if you give them the same answer, oh, we're not attorneys, I can't help you, that's the 4th or 5th time they've heard that, and they get very frustrated. Now, it's true that you're not attorneys, and it's true that you don't have the training or the expertise, perhaps, to do legal representation and to interpret things for people, but you can do more than you think you can. And they're very grateful for anything you can do for them because they've gotten the runaround from all the other agencies, and they're desperate by the time they come to you. So a few questions, just doing a reference interview, but this is a legal reference interview. If someone has a particular citation, that's something you can find. That's a document you can find. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how you can learn more about citations. You want to know the purpose of the research. If they are actually representing themselves in a legal matter, that's different than some people research the law just because they're interested. They want to prove some conspiracy theory over the last 50 years of the federal government or whatever, or they know that aliens are really in Roswell and they're trying to expose the cover-up, or they're just interested in the law, or they're college students working on a paper about the law. So just like any reference interview, you want to know the purpose. You want to ask them, what do you already know? And you'll be surprised at what they already know. Some of them know a lot. I've made the mistake of assuming that all public patrons who are after legal research are ignorant, and I've made the mistake of being condescending toward them and explaining things, and they'll say, yes, I understand that. And then we'll finally get down to the actually pretty narrow, specific, intelligent question that they had that I assumed they didn't know. I assumed they didn't know what a case is, but they did. So you want to ask them what they already know. You want to ask them, are you looking for just a summary of something, or are you looking for an actual full-text document? Just like with those summaries of legislation that we were talking about a minute ago. Sometimes that's all they want to know. They just want to know generally what is the law on some topic, in which case a secondary source might be all you need. But if they are looking for an actual bill or an actual case or an actual regulation, that's different. Also, cases, statutes, regulations. This is where some people don't know what they're asking for. They'll say, I want to know what the law is on something. Well, you're talking about different things. Are you talking about a case that has been decided? Are you talking about a statute that has been passed by the legislature? Are you talking about a regulation that has been promulgated by an agency? So you want to try to help them figure out what exactly they're looking for, what type of law they're looking for. What's their deadline? Some people, as you know, if you're involved in a court matter and you don't show up for court, the judge rules against you automatically. But some people will say, well, I'm due in court tomorrow, and so I need so-and-so and so-and-so. Or they'll say, I have court in an hour across the street. If you're in a public law library, I'm due in court in an hour, and of course we have courthouses right here in Raleigh. So you want to know the deadline. Or if they're saying, I have court in 6 months, that you can work with. A last-minute deadline you might not be able to work with. Jurisdiction is something that people are often confused about. We get calls at the legislative library where people are asking about matters that are clearly federal matters, not state matters, like copyright law. That's a federal matter. Or they're asking about their IRS bill, which of course that's federal income tax, not state level. The jurisdiction can be tricky. If someone was arrested for a crime in South Carolina 10 years ago, and now they're suing the Richland County Sheriff's Office in Columbia, South Carolina, because they feel that they were punched in the face 10 years ago and arrested improperly, that's a jurisdiction problem, because that's South Carolina law, not North Carolina law. They may be living in North Carolina now, but if they were arrested in South Carolina 10 years ago, that's South Carolina law, not North Carolina law. Or it may be a federal crime. Although they were arrested in North Carolina, if they were charged because they had 500 pounds of cocaine, that's probably a federal charge rather than a state level charge. So jurisdiction is another thing to keep in mind. And then law today or in the past, like the example I just gave. If they were arrested 10 years ago and now they're suing the agency that arrested them because they claim that they were improperly arrested, it does not matter what the law is today, it matters what the law was 10 years ago. And that's why, I'm sure you do as well, but we do at the Legislative Library, we have old North Carolina statutes going back to the 1800s for exactly that reason. Because frequently you need to know what the law was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago. And that, there aren't many databases. You may be familiar with Westlaw and LexisNexis, the two major legal research databases. They don't go back that far in statutes. So we have the print volumes. And so how can you educate yourself? These are a few tips. There are some very good books on legal research, and I just give a link to one there. Academic Law Library, like UNC Chapel Hill Law Library websites, or Harvard, or whatever, Duke University. Those academic law library websites are very good, especially the research guides. I'll show you a couple of examples later on. I talked about citation a minute ago. Is anybody familiar with the Blue Book, or what's called the Blue Book, which is, the official title is the Uniform Manual of Legal Citation. It's called the Blue Book because it's blue. We all have those library jokes about patrons who come in and ask for the Blue Book or the Red Book, but this really is called the Blue Book. That really is its name. This link, let's see, where it says click here, Kelly has this, or yes, I sent this PowerPoint presentation, so you all can have a copy of it later. If you're not able to get it somewhere else, you can feel free to contact me. So this is just a little tutorial on legal citation. So if you don't know the basics of legal citation, this would be a great way to learn it, and this is something I would recommend because so much of legal research comes down to citations. And people will often have citations, and they don't know what they mean. They don't know how to interpret them. That happens with attorneys too. Attorneys will sometimes have a partial citation. We had one at the General Assembly just the other day. Someone, a constituent question had come into one of the members who forwarded on to us, and it was actually a Code of Federal Regulations citation, but they had only part of it. So we did some sleuthing and figured out the rest of the citation. But this tutorial talks about what citation is, along with plenty of examples. Or the Blue Book itself is very well organized, and that is the last word on legal citation. If you're not familiar, or if you should be more than familiar, I guess, if you're not very knowledgeable of just the legislative process, what goes on in Congress, how bills become laws, it's very good to brush up on that. On our website, we have a very good tutorial on how a bill becomes a law in North Carolina, because a lot of questions come down to that. So it's good to brush up on that. It's good to understand court structures. Like I said a few minutes ago, some states have only one appellate court, whereas in North Carolina we have 2 levels of appellate courts. And at the federal level, there are 2 levels of appellate courts. There are the United States Courts of Appeals and then the United States Supreme Court. But there are also specialized courts in the United States, like immigration court, and there are special courts. There's the U.S. Tax Court that just hears tax matters. So be very familiar with U.S. and state court structures. Here in North Carolina, we have 2 trial courts. We have district court and we have superior court. Other states are not that way. And just in terms of terminology, whether something is federal or state, whether something is civil or criminal, sometimes questions come down to substantive law versus procedural law. Substantive meaning, what are the elements of a crime? Or procedural, when can I file this lawsuit? And I give you a couple of links to some legal encyclopedias online that'll give you good discussions of terminology. And forms, I already mentioned. So some federal forms and some state, by state I mean here in North Carolina, court forms. And then very often you will need to refer someone. Sometimes a person who's a patron really does need an attorney. You just can't help them. Sometimes they really do need an attorney. But they might not be able to afford one. You're probably all familiar with legal aid resources. Sometimes all law schools operate clinics that give the students practice, but some of those clinics will do free representation of low-cost, low-income individuals. And then at the state level, the North Carolina State Bar, I know, operates a lawyer referral service whereby you could contact them, or you could tell a patron, contact the lawyer referral service, and the lawyer referral service will connect the patron with an attorney who practices in the area that they need, and the patron will just pay a flat fee for a consultation. It's like $50, so it's very cheap. And that entitles them to, 1 hour or so consultation with the attorney. Then if they want to hire that attorney, they can, and usually the attorney will give a discount as part of the lawyer referral service program. And local bar associations will sometimes do that too. Like I worked in Charlotte, and so I know the Mecklenburg County Bar Association did the same thing. They had their own lawyer referral service. So that's a good place where you can refer people, and it is low cost and sliding scale payments. So that can help people out. Okay, so there are many, many websites, of course. Here are just a few that I want to point out. So the Internet Legal Research Guide is a good one that is very comprehensive. So it's just ilrg.com. This is a good location for forms, as you see. I click on the forms archive. So, and these are not necessarily state-specific forms. They're more like templates. The word form can have two different meanings. There are actual forms that are court forms that you have to fill out to initiate an action in the court. But sometimes the word forms is used to mean templates or just models or go-bys. So this is a good source for that. Down also the federal and state government statutes and codes, this link here. So this links you to every single state. It's a link to that state's statutes, that state's constitution, that state's administrative code. So this is a good gateway site. If you got a weird question about Connecticut legislation, this would be a place where you could direct someone to. And all the United States stuff up here at the top. And then, so lots of other good stuff on this site. So this site is definitely worth exploring. Another good one back over here, FindLaw, you may have heard of. So this is a free website that's actually owned by West, the big publishing company that I talked about before. And West creates Westlaw, which is the subscription service that every single attorney is familiar with. But this is a free site that is owned by them that has a public face and it has a legal professional's face. So the default is this public face here that's intended for the general public, not attorneys. But if you click over here on this For Legal Professionals, this takes you to a site that is somewhat useful for attorneys who are doing more high-level research. For instance, you can get some free case law here. I'll just search by a party name. So I can actually get this U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeal. So this is Gaiman v. McFarland. So this is the actual court opinion from 2004. So you can see it goes back a ways. I think this site, for the most part, the farthest it'll go back is maybe the mid-90s. Except for U.S. Supreme Court cases, it goes back farther than that to, I think, like the 1800s for U.S. Supreme Court cases. It'll go back. So that's pretty good for free coverage. Oh, I can click Read here and get the actual opinion. Now, what you don't have here is all of the indexing and all the stuff that West, the publishing company, adds to the cases. But you do get the text of the opinion. If there are any comic book fans in here, yes, this is Neil Gaiman versus Todd McFarlane. Lawsuit over the character Spawn, because they developed that character together, yet Todd McFarlane wanted to retain all the control, so Neil Gaiman sued him. And in the published reporter, the published reporter by West reproduces pictures of Spawn and Angela and the other character. So it's interesting. That's not here, unfortunately. So those are two free sites. Fastcase is not a free site. It is a subscription database, but it's very cheap. So I'm not a Fastcase salesman at all, but I just mention it because it is pretty cool. Pricing. Okay, a whopping $700 a year for, I don't know if that's an enterprise license or not, but that's pretty cheap when you consider that Westlaw or Lexis is many thousands of dollars per year. This one is pretty cheap. And here, there are some secondary sources available through here, plus all the case law, federal and all the states, and all the statutes are available here. So it's just something to keep in mind. You know, when your collection budget has so much money in it that you just don't know what to do with it, like we just have to get rid of some of this money. The bank is going to cancel our account because we have so much money. This would be something you might want to spend it on. For patron use, it's a lot cheaper than Westlaw and Lexis, and it's a lot better than these free sites. Okay, so in terms of legal research guides, you know, every law school, every university that has a law school, that has a law library, has pretty good research guides on its website. I find these to be two of the best ones. Georgetown is just very good, very detailed. But one thing I especially like is their tutorials. So this would be another way for you to educate yourself about legal research. So these are tutorials on these various topics, and there's a Blue Book tutorial that I recommend you take. If you want to learn more about secondary sources or treaties, United States treaties. So anyway, so that's a good site. And then I also have a link to UNC Chapel Hill Law Library, because they have a lot of North Carolina specific info on their site that you'll find useful. And I don't know about you, but in my career I've frequently gotten questions about, someone is looking for, someone's trying to track someone else down, or looking for information about a company. That happens in law firms all the time. Every law firm where I've worked, the attorneys who've been involved in practicing corporate law, they often need information about companies. But I've also, in law firms where I've worked, I've had to essentially do background checks on people to help locate someone, because we're suing them and we need to find them to serve them with serve process on them. So these are a couple of good guides on how to find someone online. So if you ever get this question, if a patron ever says, I need to be able to find my ex-wife, why do you want to find her? Oh, I just need to find her. I have something of hers, I want to give it back to her. This is just a good guide on how to do that. And this is a very good guide on locating company information, doing company research. And so this is from the Library of Congress. And although that says updated 2013, individual pages have been updated more recently than that. Like this was updated December of 2017. So it's pretty current. And then there are lots of law librarian blogs. This one is my favorite. This one I think is one of the best. LLRX. And if you go to the archives and browse by subject, all kinds of topics like energy, health, or down here under legal research, citators, legislative, litigation support, United States law, various topics. So this is a good site. And this link is a list of law library blogs of all different kinds. AALL, that's the American Association of Law Librarians. So that's like the ALA for law librarians. So that's good. And in fact, although Charlotte School of Law no longer exists, the blog that I started is still there. Hasn't been updated since 2016, but it's still there. And I know everyone will want to read my contributions, so all you have to do is name check me there. Murphy's Law School is a cartoon, actually, that one of our librarians there was a cartoonist and a caricaturist. So he and I created a cartoon that you can check out on your own time. Okay, so sort of wrapping up here. So these are a few of the unique items that we have in our collection. So all of our, lots of legislative work is done in committees, and those committees are required by law to keep minutes of all the open meetings. They are required to keep minutes, and we archive those. We have those going back to, and that link takes you to the finding aid on our website. We have committee minutes all the way back to probably the 1920s. of them are on microfilm, which is okay. But we frequently get patrons, attorneys, who are looking at legislative history. So they want to say, here's this law. I want to know why this law was created. I want to know what the legislature had in mind when they passed this statute. Sometimes the minutes of particular committee meetings will tell you that. So we have those. As I mentioned, we have superseded, or the old statutes back to the 1800s. You probably have a collection like that here too, but we may have some that you don't have. And also the Supreme Court Library has a historical collection. They have some that we don't have, probably. This link here will tell you, for an existing statute, how has it been amended, what existing statutes have been amended by bills passed in a particular year. So you can see that by year. So if anyone asks you, I want to know all the legislation that was passed in 2006, I want to know what it changed, this will tell you. What it amended, if anything. We have on microfilm, we have bills, we have votes. So if anyone's looking for that, if anyone wants to know so this bill that was passed, did all the Democrats vote for it? Which Democrats voted against it? Which Republicans voted against it? We have those voting records back to 1971. And we often get questions about how many bills did so-and-so senator sponsor or introduce? We have that information too, back to 1969. Our website also has some research guides on how to do legislative history. That's a very popular research topic, the history of a law. People, especially attorneys, want to know that. And it's tricky to do, but we have some guides here on our website that can help with that. So if someone comes to you and they start talking about legislative history, this will be a good place to direct them to, because this will tell you step by step how to do it. Start here if you know the year. Start here if you know the statute section, whatever. And then we have a link to other historical resources too. And then a couple more things I want to mention. So the General Assembly, we just started a Twitter feed a month or so ago. So you can tweet us. And my staff and I are actually in charge of the Twitter feed. Those fools, they put us in charge of the General Assembly Twitter account. But anyway, so, we're not going to tweet partisan stuff, but we'll sometimes tweet research-related things or just general announcements. And then a lot of the material that I've been talking about comes from this, which I wrote a few years ago, the Accidental Law Librarian. So I'll leave a copy of this for you to share. Now, this was published in 2013, so it's a little bit dated, parts of it are, but a lot of it is still useful. And I talk about more examples in here. So, any questions for me? Any other questions? Been some good questions so far.
A couple one.
Yes.
So if someone wants to, I've had somebody come in before and they'll say, well, my ancestor served as a senator or something back in the 1800s. I want to find out more about what he did in that role.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to find anything?
We have a lot of historical, biographical info on legislators, but also those, I think you can find some of that in that top book or this one here. But I think we have some other stuff as well. So that's the kind of question you could refer to us, and we have a lot of that info. And depending on, now if it's like the 1800s, I don't know how much we have like that. But if it's within the last 50 years or 60, 70 years, we can be very helpful there, I think. Anything else? Well, thank you very much, and feel free to contact us at the Legislative Library with any assistance you need. Feel free to refer patrons to us. And thanks very much.